All right. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. Thank you for joining us for this event, which is co-organized by the African Association of Urban Mobility Authorities and the Africa Transport Policy Program, that's SSATP. We're very pleased to have with us colleagues from urban mobility authorities across the continent, across Africa, and as well as our guests from the Montreal Metropolitan region. So today's session is going to focus on institutional governance and on the use of data for urban mobility planning and management. We will begin with a few opening remarks, then we'll hear two presentations from Montreal, followed by a reaction from the city of Dakar, and then move into the discussion. So please note that live interpretation is available for this webinar. Most of the presentations will be in French. So to select your preferred language, please click on the little globe at the bottom of your Zoom window, and you should have a choice of two channels, and you can select the language that works for you. I'm going to say this in French. Donc, bienvenue à tous. Si vous voulez faire usage de l'interprétation simultanée,
if you would like to have
vous pouvez cliquer en bas de votre écran sur le petit globe et sélectionner la langue qui vous convient.
Language that you would prefer to listen to.
Now that's done, to formally open the session, it is my pleasure to invite engineer Mrs. Abimbola Akinajo, the Managing Director of the Lagos Metropolitan Area Transport Authority, Lamata, and President of AUMA, deliver the opening remarks. Madam President, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Simon. Good day, distinguished participants, and welcome to this conversation, and that's what I'd like to call it. So, on behalf of the African Association of Urban Mobility Authorities, AUMA, I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar. AUMA is a collaborative platform that brings together urban transport authorities and stakeholders across Africa to advance sustainable, inclusive, and efficient mobility through knowledge sharing, capacity building, and partnerships. Today's session, Institutional Governance and the Use of Data for Urban Mobility, Planning and Management in Greater Montreal, will be delivered by Mr. Ludwig Desjardins, Executive Director, Development and Performance, and Mr. Hamesh Alizadeh, Director, Data Analytics of the Metropolitan Region Transport Authority of Greater Montreal. This authority was established by the Government of Quebec in 2017. ARTM is the organizing authority responsible for planning, financing, and promoting an integrated transit network across one of North America's most complex metropolitan regions. Its experience offers a rich case study in the multi-stakeholder governance, coordinated financing, and data-driven planning. The session hopefully will draw on ARTM's experience, highlighting governance, frameworks, financing, and multi-level partnerships, as well as the practical use of data in planning and operations. It will also reflect on the opportunities and constraints facing African urban mobility authorities and what can be learned from and shared with international counterparts. Through this webinar, AUMA aims to promote peer learning and exchange with transport authorities from other regions, creating space to share experiences, reflect on common challenges, and identify practical lessons for our context. Thank you, and I wish you a very productive session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Abimbola, for those opening remarks and for setting the scene clearly for us. We will now move straight to the presentations from our colleagues from ARTM. So although you've already introduced him, I'd like to invite Mr. Ludwig Desjardins, who is the Executive Director for Development and Performance at ARTM, to take the floor. Ludwig, thank you very much for being with us today, and over to you.
Merci. Bonjour à tous. Merci, Monsieur Sadi, pour l'invitation.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It is an honor for us to be with your group in order to explain our organization, how we are constructed on the institution side. Thank you to Madame Akinejo for the introduction. I will share immediately the presentation that will be done in French, and we will answer later to the questions in both languages, though. So let's introduce my person. I am in the authority from the very beginning that was created in 2017. I am also invested internationally in the International Union of Transportation, and in the organization, vice chair of the board and also a member of the policy board, and I often see my colleagues in Africa. It is a pleasure. It is always a pleasure to have an exchange on governance, financing, and transportation. It is also always a pleasure to present our model, which is, I will share my screen, that will be better. So it is a model that is unique in the American context and standard for Europeans. We inspired ourselves on the European law implemented in Montreal now, and I will give you the history of our authority. Why was it created? Its financing, what is the framework in policy, in governance, and also what are the challenges in Montreal and in the North American context. So the region, in Montreal region here, you see a show. It is a territory, 4,000 square kilometers, 4 million inhabitants, 2 million employment posts, and 8 million transportation operations. So it is complex for governance, 83 municipalities in the region. Canada is also special. We are a federation, as you see the province of Quebec to the left, with other provinces, and transportation is a competence that is regional, and we have different transportation, and for Quebec, transportation is shared between the province and the ministry as to the financing and the organization. So before 2017, before the creation, it was much more complex with a multiplicity of stakeholders and policies. In North America, the model is a municipal authorities. It was limited as to the metropolitan scale. Each municipality or local municipality had a network with rules, different modes for transportation. And when the regions developed, we had to add several visions to each other, several organizations to each other, and with differences between them. So you had several territories, you had to pay transportation in different transportation modes. We used transportation that was varied according to the municipality that was crossed. And the financing was difficult because each municipality could finance it as they wanted. And we wanted something regional with metro, for instance, and different services. So there was a disparity of financing with political conflicts that might happen, vision conflicts also. So to summarize, before the authority, it was difficult to have governance for operations and decision making, and there was no metropolitan vision of transportation, which means that projects were delayed because of financing, and a complexity as to the qualification. There were 500 rates in the region before creating our authority, and we had an integration later of all the fares. So the government decided to work with the law that created the regional authority, our organization, in order to cover the whole of the region. So, as I told you, the inspiration mainly were the models that we find in Europe with the authority and operators under the authority, and the operators sometimes is an authority also. There is a mélange. And this is what we see in Europe, in Paris, for instance. And Transport for London is also an example of such a model in Great Britain, and it is an integration, regionally speaking, with powers to finance, to rate, and to organize the transportation. For Canada, we had Metrolink in Toronto and another one in another region that are not based on the European model, for which we did research, and this is what we decided on. Our mission, it's a regional cohesion, is to plan, organize, finance, and promote public transportation in Montreal, in the Metropolitan region. And this is an experience on mobility that would be simple, integrated, fluid, and effective. But in the North American context, we are trying to fight the car transportation for congestion, environment issues, and electric transportation is bringing more options to people for individual transportation. Again, there are many external negative items for individual transportation. Now, for governance, we have a structure that you see here. So you have the province, the Government of Quebec, with orientations in policies that are really the framework. Then we have a metropolitan community in Montreal, or all municipalities, 83 of them. And that gives a vision for urban development on the territory. And some members of our board are sitting there. Then we have our authority, that is planification, financing, and organization for public transportation. And then the operations, we have the operators for transportation, 5 of them in the region, and the EXO operator that is for certain transportation, and then the periphery. RTL and STL have 2 municipalities that they serve in the north of Montreal. STM, which is at the service of 2 million people with buses and metro, 80% of the transportation that is taken up by the STM, and then a new automatic metro project, which is REM, and it is being deployed in the territory on the network, and a third one will be open in 3 or 4 weeks.
So the role of the operations, they work in the public sector, and they have their own employees and their own operations. When we're looking at the metro or the express lines, we have operators that have been trained by Alstom and other companies. They are the firms that carry out day-to-day operations. For EXO, the commuter trains, we have Transdelf, which is a French company that has done the training, and the buses are operated by several different private businesses and operators from Canada. So we have a hybrid model where we have some lines that are operated by a private sector and others that are operated by public, and some that are a mix of both. With regards to governance, there are 15 members of the ARTM. So we have the president of the board, who has been appointed by the Government of Quebec. We have 5 elected representatives, which are the mayors of the 5 regions. We have the mayor of the city of Montreal and 4 other mayors. Then we have 9 independent members that have been appointed by the Government of Quebec and the Metropolitan community of Montreal. So when we talk about independent, we mean people who didn't receive their position because of political reasons. They're not political appointees, but they are people who have a relevant background or training so that they can best serve this board. So they might be university professors who work on questions dealing with transportation. They might be lawyers or people who are members of other professions that are related to the work of the board. So we have an interesting hybrid model that we use with regards to the political representatives and the independent representatives, and they can make decisions based on information for various subjects. They can look at projects that are future projects and ongoing questions. With regards to our financing, we're looking at the situation before the pandemic because many things changed since the pandemic. So about 25%, the 2.6 billion that we have, around a little under 3 billion in Canadian dollars. That's the budget for the whole region. So we have different fares, different services, and different fares for these services. We have received about $800 million that we receive from the government. We have the municipalities that provide about a third of our financing. All of the landowners, all of the property owners pay tax to the municipality. And so this one portion of this tax goes towards funding public transportation. We also have funding from the government, and we use this in order to fund different infrastructure projects, new projects that we want to put into place. This also provides subsidies for operations and investments. We also receive funds from drivers. There is a tax on car registration and license plates. Every year, each car owner has to pay a tax. It's about $150 per car. And we also have a tax on gas, which is about 3 cents per liter. So we saw some adjustments of these taxes during the pandemic as well. But at that point, it was 3 cents per liter. So for every liter that someone buys, 3 cents is allotted for the ARTM. There are also other sorts of revenue, whether we have commercial activities in the stations or advertising. I did already mention the complex fare structure that we have in the region. So you can see here we have all of these different fare regions. So you have here the island of Montreal, which is number 6. There are about 2 million inhabitants of this island. And then we have all of these other zones that are considered the suburbs. And before each of these sectors that you see in different colors had its own fare and its own fare structure. So there were students that in some areas would pay, in other areas they didn't have to pay. There were people who received reduced fares, where in other areas they would not receive these reduced fares. So everything was quite complex. Sometimes even they needed to buy several different tickets, several different fares. So it was a very divided fare structure. So during the pandemic, in 2021 and 2022, we simplified this system. We said, we're not going to have a fare for each sector and for each operator. We're going to have fares that fall under the purview of the authority. So we based this on a zone system. So we have Zone A, which is the island of Montreal. We have Zone B, which is the close suburbs. Then we have Zone C, which is the Greater Montreal area. And then Zone D, which falls outside of our area of operation, but with whom we coordinate certain services. So someone who is traveling from Zone C to Zone B can buy a monthly pass. And so someone who makes this, who goes from Region C to Zone A can buy a different pass if that is a common commute that that person has to make. This is a common approach used by different mobility authorities. However, there can be adjustments based on the setup of your region. So this is something that we were able to implement very quickly. In just a few years, we were able to create more coherence within the region, and we were able to simplify fares for people who are using public transportation within our region. So to give you an idea of the shock that we experienced during the pandemic, you can see this significant drop. In North America, public transportation is very well used, but there are various uses for it. So many people who will use it to go to work or to their job. There are people who continued to need to use it during the pandemic to go to what we called essential work. And there were other people who did not necessarily have to go into work, go into their office. They were able to use different online platforms like Teams, so they didn't have to take public transportation. So our ridership really diminished. We lost about 80% of our ridership. So that 20% that you see there are the people who don't have a car, who had no other option, but who needed to commute to go into work, people who were performing essential jobs, people who work in hospitals, or otherwise people who had no other choice but to use public transportation continued to use it. But as you can see, there was a significant decrease, and it has taken a very long time to come back and return to previous levels. You can see that throughout this period, up until 2025, we are still at about 85 or 90% of the ridership that we had before the pandemic. That means that there is a significant portion of the population that has not come back, and that has had a significant effect on our funding. But we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and we're getting close to the same ridership that we had before the pandemic. And this is something that we're seeing everywhere in Europe and in other regions. We're seeing it more in certain regions of the world, places where we have a very different ridership. You may see a different shock. And here, however, we saw a significant increase in people who were working from home. When we're looking at the different modes of transportation, most people are driving themselves in their car. So they will use roads. But what we consider to be the more sustainable forms of transportation are here in this red box. This is 33%. We also have active transportation, which is walking or cycling, something where the person is powering the movement. But this gives us a good idea of what kind of transportation is used by people. People may use public transportation or active transportation in order to avoid traffic if they need to go downtown, because if they're in their car, they have to deal with much more significant traffic issues. As a territory, we are constantly working to encourage people to use more public transportation. Here is what we've seen between 2018 and 2023. We've seen some adjustments and changes in different modes of transportation used by people. So we can see that there's actually been a 4% increase in people who use active modes of transportation, so walking and cycling. In fact, in Montreal, cycling has become more popular. When we look at 20 years ago or even before that, we did not see many people who were taking their bicycle to go to work or to commute. But now we're seeing more use of bicycles because we have better infrastructure, we have more bike paths, and we know that those have been important investments in adjusting the modes of transportation. When we're looking at the region with regards to its composition in the urban center, you can see the island that I talked about, the island of Montreal. And in red, we have a more dense residential area to the paler regions, which are less dense. So as you can see, this is the center of town where we have a very dense residency. This is where there are lots of businesses, lots of shops, but there are also a lot of residents. There is a university as well, and all of that is very much concentrated in this central area. As you move further away from the center, you move out into less dense populations, people who have detached houses, for example. In Montreal, we find ourselves in the agricultural belt of Canada. So this is very fertile land. So the land that you see that is green is often protected land. So when we're talking about urban mobility, we're talking mainly about this region that you see that is in red and yellow, while the green is protected land that is used for agricultural purposes within the province. So quite quickly, here are some images of what you see in downtown Montreal. We have many different kinds of residences and housing. We'll have separate housing or multifamily housing. You'll have a building with 4 or 5 different residential units. So that is how we know that there is a lot of density in this region. That's a common setup for North America. As soon as we move out of the central region of downtown, we come out and we see more what we think of when we think of North America: detached houses, a house with a pool, for example. We have large spread out parking lots, large shopping centers. And so this can be a problem for public transportation because having such spaced out areas means that you have a bit more difficulty providing public transportation and having different stops to serve the largest population. So it might be easier to have public transportation in these very densely populated areas, but when you have places that are more sparsely populated, it is harder to reach more people. And that just gives you an idea of what the downtown area looks like. When we're looking at the public transportation network, you can see here that we have Montreal Island that is quite dense, and you have a metro line with 4 different lines, 68 stations. We have some new lines. We have a new express line in downtown. We then have commuter trains that you can see in these darker lines. Then in the gray areas, we have about 600 bus lines, which are often supported by the local municipalities.
We also have a plan for the region for urban development, how it will be performed. This is a plan that was adopted by the Association of the Municipalities for the Metropolitan region to orient 40% of development of population on the network of public transportation. That's what I said. So the region was developed on the road network for cars, which is the dominant transportation mode, and we wanted to have development on public transportation networks to improve the usage and also fight the congestion, the environment issues, and so on and so forth. So you see here the network for transportation, and in color, you have the levels of densities that are around the stations. So on the metro station, you cannot build over certain density housing, and it is applied according to the transportation modes, the proximity of the station, which contributes to stimulate the usage of public transportation. We also have a strategic plan for development to cover the whole region, and we have ambitions, but you see what is our orientation in 2050, what we would like to have the active and collective transportation system. 33% of fares are of that type. We would like to have a majority by 2050, which is a challenge, of course. And we also have, for the next 5 years, we have a development for performance financing, which is a challenge that is quite important. And we have a plan that is reviewed every year and every 5 years and will be adapted for each year. I am almost done with this unit for my presentation, but how do we contract services for the public transportation in the region? A few members of the authority are online and will be able to give you a context for this issue. We have a service offer for modes, bus, metro, trains, and adapted transportation for handicapped people. We have special transportation for them, and we have $2 billion for operation for the networks in the region. And we have a contract with operators. Then we have a protocol of agreement for the services, and it is about the same that we have in Europe. So this covers the offer given by the operators with new services, client information, promotion, and selling tickets for transportation, because it is our fares that we apply. But the operators do sell the tickets and they give us the money. And also the performance and quality of services with indicators for performance and quality. The most difficult item to implement is number 4, performance and quality of service, which is in development, because we hybrid system for transports that are public and private. It might be easier to perform it because we call for proposals, we have a contract, and we indicate what are the rules with performance indicators, and then the companies review the indicators and then tell us if they want to participate or not. In transportation, for public transportation, though, that are legacy transport, it is more difficult because this is public-public as a relationship. And we work with organizations that are long-time legacy, and it is very difficult to change the way of working. So we have the dual aspects in the region. It's a hybrid system that is very interesting, but we would like to have performance and quality that are being reviewed in the contract. Then we have a contract of all investments in capital investments and infrastructure that are being built by the operators with terminals for buses, garages, or maintenance for the Metro of Montreal, for instance, that was built in the 1960s. We have a maintenance of assets, and through the contract with the with the operator. We have a contract for all investments for maintenance of assets. So, which enables us to have a framework for the investments and for the operations for the operators. I hope that this was understandable, what I said, and that it gave you another view of the way we operate. And I hope to be able to answer your questions.
We will now move directly to our second speaker, Mr. Hamze Alizadeh, who is Director for Data and Analytics, also with ARTM. Over to you.
Merci beaucoup. Bonjour tout le monde.
Thank you very much. Good morning to all. It is a pleasure to be with you today. Simon, how much time would you give me? I would like to be short, but I will go fast, I hope. Go ahead, go ahead. We have the time. About 10 minutes. That's fine, thank you. So, it's a pleasure to be with you. My name is Hamze Alizadeh, Director for Data and Analytics at the ARTM. I work at the Management of Development and Performance with my colleague, and our mission is to put data to work for sustainable and efficient mobility. So we developed analysis and tools and partnership for research in order to inform the strategic choices of ARTM and its partners. As my colleague told you, we were created in 2017, so we are a young organization. We have a lot of work to do still, but our ambition, our vision is to become a reference in transport data intelligence and create an integrated, transparent, and collaborative ecosystem that would maximize the collaboration and the impact of data on planning. All this, of course, to improve the client experience in Montreal. Our team works on different items, on data collection, then structuring data and storing data in collaboration with our teams in technology and information in the country. Then we work on data analysis and enrichment, which means that data are used for models, and then we visualize the information and we share it. Of course, there are two capacities that support this expertise. First of all, the governance of data. I will tell you more about it in details, and then partnership for research and development that we are developing with external partners. Now, we have sub-teams, if you will, with the capacities and competencies that are within our team. So we're working on the customer intelligence to see with clients, for instance, do they know us, our services, are they satisfied with our services? The team for modeling also, using models for simulation and to develop them in our authority to understand what scenarios we'll have for operations and in the future for the behaviors of transportation of people in Montreal. We also have another team that deals with geomatics, the geospatial and mapping of our organization. We have a small team that deals with the data science for development models, for indicators, for projections, analysis that would be advanced on data. Then we also have a team that is on collecting data on mobility to understand activities and behaviors in mobility in the region and I will tell you more about it later. A small team that is on the business intelligence with the organization to developing and structuring the databases and the information from data. And then in our industrialization team, we are trying to industrialize the developed processes. So we have an algorithm that we develop, and then we'll put it into the organization. In this team, we have a security analysis and performance analysis according to good practices in coding and information and so on. And then we have the data governance that is in charge of implementing the processes for governance with the framework, the roles and responsibility for data, and the quality assurance for our organization. To give you an idea of the data that we access and the ones that we use for our analysis, have categories. So we have data as to the demand of transportation. So for mobility, as I told you, data on the other services in the region, for instance, the PC, that is ride-sharing bicycles and cars, transaction data for validation of fares for buses and transportation. We also have items for our transportation services that do a counting of people who come in and come out, data on taxis, on congestion on roads, data also on the sales of fares and tickets, the onboard counting of the rail system for the number of people coming on and getting off, and passive data, which are being bought if we need to, that come from the usage of mobile phones to know how many people go from one region to the next. We also have data on offer of transportation. So that's what you see on the screen, and also on the road network, GPS data that we also use. Data on infrastructure, so parking, special roads, and for people, so customers or population, for census, and the different products for so that comes from the statistics in Quebec. To understand the territory, we have several sources of data for the generation of transportation, administration, and so on and so forth. And then we have everything that is customers that we manage in order to understand the notoriety, the satisfaction, and there is a panel that we look at for having the opinions of people, of customers, on different items. We have data for segmentation to understand our customer base, and I will tell you more later. And we have also studies on the transition of our numeric transition, because we are digitized on our system for validation of our tickets.
Perhaps you would be interested in knowing about the tools that we use, particularly when we're looking at working with the data. We use several platforms like Brio and Evolution to collect data. Evolution is an open source platform. We collect data using surveys. We have been using Azure, but we're moving to some different platforms, some structures that are related to Google. We work in some different platforms that support analysis for structuring and storage. For analysis and enrichment of data, we use various platforms like Python, R, and we also can benefit from all of the tools offered by these platforms to improve our analyses. For modeling and simulation, we use different dashboard programs for visualization and data sharing, like Power BI and GeoExplorer. As Ludwig said, we have a strategic planning framework, which includes our strategic goals, our ambitions. We're looking at short-term and long-term goals. In the long term, we hope that in 2050, half of all transportation will be either public transit or active modes of transportation. But we need data in order to make sound decisions. So we need to collect and manage and govern this data. We need to evaluate the reality on the ground so that we can know what is happening on our networks. And then we can plan for future scenarios and we can evaluate the impact of any future programs. I'm going to very quickly touch on this slide because I've already talked about a lot of the details, but when we're looking at collection management and data governance, it's important to make sure that you have good data that will give you an idea of the different mobility behaviors in the region. For example, car use, use of active modes of transportation, use of public transportation. Then the next challenge is how do you manage this data to make sure that it is structured appropriately, to make sure that the data is reliable, so that you can continue to use it. And then we need to put into place a governance system for data so we can establish rules and responsibilities so that we can guarantee the cohesion and quality of the data. Now, when we're performing an analysis of the current reality, we need to understand how, when, and why people are using transportation. And then we need to look at questions of accessibility, people who have access to mass transit. We also need to perform an analysis of the equity. We want to make sure that we provide equitable access to all people, particularly for vulnerable groups. We also need to analyze a service performance. So we need to make sure that we are following the quality, reliability, and efficiency of the services that we offer. And in line with that, of course, we need to do financial and economic analyses. We need to look at how to balance costs, revenues, and other costs in order to continue to provide equitable services. Then when we're looking at future scenarios and evaluating the impact of our programs, we need to look at our having a strong modeling capacity. We want to be able to develop and maintain simulation tools so that we can have credible projections and predictions. We need to have some understanding of why people are making the decisions they're making. We also need to explore future alternatives. We can have a multidimensional evaluation of impacts. It's going to look at outside of ridership. We're going to evaluate the economic, social, and environmental consequences of each scenario. Then finally, we want to look at how these scenarios can be integrated with land use management and public policy that we already have in place. There are many, many challenges in all of this, but if I were to give you 3 main challenges that we are facing today, we have an issue with data fragmentation and reliability. We have very fragmented data right now because they're coming from various actors. And so we are trying to harmonize this data and also to make sure that it is much more reliable so that we can propose a vision of a homogeneous metropolitan area. We also need to find a balance between methodological rigor and clear indicators that everyone can understand, and indicators that can be used by decision makers and our partners. We also need to develop flexible models that are flexible and at the same time credible. These models need to be adaptable in terms of uncertainty and in order to evaluate impacts of public policy decisions. So I wanted to give you some examples of what we do with the different projects that we have implemented. When we are looking at collecting mobility data, we have our survey, Mobility Outlook, that looks at management of public transportation. So we sent out household surveys. This is something that we have done for a very long time in the Montreal and Greater Quebec region. So something that we have been doing since 1970. This is an approach that we've used in the province of Quebec. More specifically, in Montreal, we do these surveys every 5 years. The last one was in 2023. We saw about a 4 to 5% of households that were contacted by telephone call. And recently, we have shifted over to a more web-based approach. We noted that there was a significant decline in the number of people who answered telephone calls. So we want to switch to a web-based approach so that we can have a more representative sample of the population. So we're working on modernizing our household surveys. We are using the internet in order to contact people. And we are also using that in order to facilitate the collection of data as well as the validation of this data. So we can make sure that different responses are logical. When we're looking at other modernization efforts, we looked at age distribution, how many people responded, and we had some good news with regards to the different age groups of people who responded, as well as the number of people who are based on the days that people were using transportation. We had about 13% who started to answer the survey, 10% that completed the survey, 95% came from the internet. We had about a little over 76% of surveys that were completed, which is a good percentage. When we're looking at what we did to modernize our survey, we wrote an article in which we discuss the details of what I have presented to you today. We also worked on developing different indicators. So I wanted to give you an example with regards to our strategic development plan. We have 3 strategic directions. And it is possible that over time we will be able to propose services that are more responsive to the demands of the population. So we have 15 indicators. 2 are related to accessibility to job workplaces, and accessibility to businesses. When we're looking at this map, we have accessibility to public transportation services. And what you see in yellow or in a darker yellow, that is basically follows the metro network. And so that's the information with regards to access to public transportation. Then when we're looking at equity, we can do a calculation of the vulnerable populations in the region and compare it to accessibility. So we were able to then use these maps of population and vulnerable populations and plug them into different scenarios to make sure that we had equitable accessibility to the transportation and to jobs. So this is an idea of what we did to develop these indicators for accessibility and equity. We have an article about what we did. We have a toolbox and we have an article about the data sets. And we consider these to be open source data in Canada. And all of this population data is something that can be used in any region in Canada. So for our modeling framework, we had an objective. The objective of this framework was to be able to evaluate what would happen if we put into place a specific policy, if we created a new bus line, if we adjusted our current situation, what would be the response, what would be the consequences in the future? So we used a model that is based on a classic deployment. So we have the three initial steps, which is mobility drivers, how mobility and trips are spread across the region, what is the modal division. And then we were able to use a disaggregated model for mobility using public transportation. When we're looking at our modeling framework, we were able to look at use a more strategic approach. When we started with our research, we worked with different partners, the University of Toronto, as well as other groups in Montreal, so that we could have information about the entire population. And so you have the information here. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask for further details, and I would be very happy to share the details in the study with you.
Excusez-moi, mais juste, je vous suggère qu'on passe peut-être un peu plus
I'm sorry, but I wanted to suggest that maybe we could move quite
Parfait.
quickly to the next part to finish up so that we can move into the next section of our webinar. So when we're looking at the at data sharing and the data hub, we know that the mobility data hub that we are currently setting up, its goal is to create a regional access point to mobility data so that people will have access to the best and most reliable data about mobility in the region. And we also hope that with this hub, we will be able to improve access to data, and with that, we can improve the quality of the data. So that is all.
Thank you very much, Hamze. And now to help us reflect on these presentations from the perspective of African cities, we will start by hearing a reaction by Mr. Gora Sarr, who is the Chief Executive of the Executive Council for Sustainable Urban Transport in Senegal. Gora, thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to your reflections. Over to you.
Merci beaucoup, Simon. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Simon. Thank you to our presenters as well. And thank you to Abimbola. Thank you for organizing this workshop. I know that we don't have a lot of time, so I will very quickly talk about SSATP and our organizing authority in African cities. We are an executive council for urban transportation in Dakar. It was created in 2017. This was created based on a law. This etude was created in a specific context. We knew that we needed to reform our transportation network because at the time, transportation was strongly affected by the informal sector. So we needed to develop a framework that was tailored to our urban transportation needs. That was just to give you a bit of context. for the creation of SSATP. So I also wanted to note that there is a difference with what has just been presented in Montreal. The context for us was much more affected by the informal sector,
with vehicles for public or collective transportation not organized, and that was an issue. The renewing and the professionalization of the sector. So very often, these are issues that are common in African cities with the presence of the informal sector. Thus, as I said earlier, amongst the missions for the SSATP, which is traditional for our organization planning, for multimodal regulation on transportation and coordination with all the actors, and the integration of fares and information of the individual who take our transportation. Thus, the missions today are based on several pillars: developing multimodal transportation, planning support, and developing the urban sector, and everything that is the offer of transportation for multimodal transportation. So nowadays, our organization is being transformed to organize transportation for mobility. This is also to say that since 1997, we were an organization for transportation, but given the law voted in 2022, our competencies were improved to integrate the circulation and parking, because both are often forgotten, and we have developed our perimeter for assets. This is to take charge of Thiès, that is con-urban with Dakar. To remind you the context, this to remind you our power. Then we have documents for planning. That's what we're in charge of over 10 years. And we have the PINUS with the support of our partners. So we have a planning document for 2035 that will implement all the actions for development of our train network, the regulation and organization of transportation. On the actions that are being performed by our surveys, the SSATP is special for the renewing and professionalization of the transportation in African cities, because we see that in the 97, all the transportation were informal, and we have to work with individual operators because all operators had their own transportation system. We had to regroup them or group them, organize them, because there are several actors in this, and we wanted to try and professionalize this sector. And that's what I say often in the African context. There are several reforms that were launched for the first generation, second generation, and third generation in reforming. Why? Because we had artisan transportation. We couldn't talk about fare integration nor data, since we first had to organize the informal operators and then bring them to be professionals. That's why the surveys since 2005, with the implementation of the association after for financing of transportation in urban areas with the World Bank, which is a program for renewal and professionalization of the vehicles, which enable us to renew 2,100 vehicles and now they are regrouped in 14 units. So we had 1,200 owners of vehicles, and now they are in 14 groups, which was a very deep challenge that we won over. So we have perspectives for development, and with second-generation reforms and third-generation reforms. And through this, what we wanted is take advantage of our structure project for TRT, because we have it in service. So we wanted to restructure the network with an integration of fares and modes of transportation. And so we wanted to solve the issues in data. And my colleague will broach the topic, the head of the division of the observatory. I will conclude with talking about the institution side of the service. We are under the Ministry of Transportation and the financing management, which is the budget ministry. So it is different from what you presented. We do not have a territory base. We know that the territories are major factors that should be integrated in our institutional system. That's why they were integrated previously in the governance item, which was the plenary assembly that we had implemented, even though today we created a board that doesn't have only the operators nor the territories, but it is being modified so as to integrate the actors that are very important and significant. We are not under the city, but we are under the Ministry of Transportation, because in Senegal, with our text on decentralization, transportation is not decentralized as a competency. And that's why the central state is organizing and regulating transportation. The Article 4 for decentralization is being developed in order to find a balance between the integration of the territories for the management of all the issues for mobility, on mobility. So we see that today we couldn't work on mobility without integrating the municipalities that are actors of significance. I shall conclude with the issue of financing. Financing in our cities, in Dakar, we have investments on one side, with the mobilization of state resources through partners, technical and financial partners, in order to implement projects for renewing and professionalization of transportation. We're supported by the World Bank. We have a BRT project that has been implemented with the support of the World Bank and the other bank. And we have a project for restructuring urban transportation, finance with Team Group. So globally, the investments are in priority born with external financing, and we are working with a model now in order to have a stable financing of urban transportation with the operations part, which is one of the challenges. It's very easy to find investors to
mais toute la
implement
partie
projects,
entretien,
but the
maintenance, coût de
maintenance
fonctionnement
and
liés
all
en fait
and
au transport
operation
urbain,
cost of urban
voilà, souvent on sent
transportation,
un déficit et qu'il
very
faut
often
combler. Et
there is a
on a vu tout à
deficit
l'heure
that
par
we have
rapport
to take care of.
au schéma qui
And
a
we saw
été
it in the plan
présenté tout à l'heure
that
à
presented
Montréal.
earlier
Il y a
in
une
Montreal.
contribution
There is a
de l'État,
contribution
une
of the
contribution du
government,
secteur
a
privé par rapport
contribution
au
of the private
financement
sector
de la
to
mobilité
finance the
de manière
mobility
générale.
in
Donc,
a general way.
pour résumer, avant de laisser la
So,
parole
to
rapidement à ma
summarize,
collègue sur la
before
partie
giving
observatoire,
the floor to my
c'est
colleague
que
from the
les villes
observatory,
africaines, notamment Dakar,
the cities in
présentent en fait
Africa,
quelques
Dakar
spécificités,
especially, are
notamment
very
au volet
specific on
professionnalisation et renouvellement du
professionalization
parc
and
lié en fait au
renewing of the
secteur
vehicles
informel.
in the informal
Et
sector.
cela, en fait, ça constitue quand même
And
des
this
étapes
is
majeures qui doivent
several
être
steps that
pris en
have
charge dans nos documents de
to be
planification,
managed
parce que si on
in
brûle
our
un certain
planning
nombre d'étapes,
documents,
ça
because if
peut
we go too
amener des
fast,
difficultés
we will
par la
have
suite. Vous pouvez
issues
aujourd'hui
at a later
inscrire
date.
une dynamique
We
d'aller vers
have
des
a
réformes de
dynamic
quatrième
to
génération,
have
mais on va se rendre compte
fourth
qu'en
generation
réalité, les
reforms,
acteurs
but still
principaux risquent
the
de ne pas
actors
s'approprier de ces schémas-là et
will
ça
not
pourrait
have the
constituer en fait
ownership of the
des
plans,
difficultés
and that
dans la
will
mise en
be an
œuvre.
issue in
Donc,
the implementation.
maintenant, à
Thus,
cela s'ajoute en fait la croissance
we also
démographique
have
qui
the
augmente de
demographic
manière
increase
exponentielle,
that is
d'où en fait
exponential, and thus
le défi en fait d'accélérer
the
un peu
challenges
l'ensemble de
to
ces réformes dans les villes africaines pour arriver un peu à
fast
quelque chose
track
qui est
the reforms in the African
voilà, qui répond aux
context
besoins. Donc très
in order to
rapidement, en
cover
deux
our
minutes, si
needs.
vous permettez,
Now,
Simon,
if
c'est
you allow
de
us,
laisser
my colleague will, in
Ahmad,
2
qui est le chef
minutes,
de la division de l'Observatoire,
and he is the
parler de
chief of
l'Observatoire
the
des déplacements.
division of
En 2 minutes,
the
on se retrouve pour donner notre
Observatory
intervention.
for Mobility,
Ouais,
and
merci,
he'll
merci
take
beaucoup,
2
Gora.
minutes.
Et oui,
Thank you
ok,
very much,
on aimerait
Gora.
garder du temps pour le
Yes,
dialogue,
we would
donc
like to keep a few minutes
Ahmad, à
for
vous la
dialogue.
parole. Vous avez
So,
quelques
Amadou,
minutes.
you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Simon.
Thank you very
Merci
much.
pour déjà cette
Thank
opportunité
you
de partager
for the opportunity
ça
for
sur
sharing
l'expérience de
on the
Dakar en matière
experience in
de
Dakar,
management en fait de données.
giving
Donc, on l'a
on the
déjà
management
dit
of
tout à
data.
l'heure,
So,
cette étude
as
en fait
we
s'est
said
dotée
earlier,
d'un observatoire
so we
en
have an
mobilité
observatory
urbaine
for mobility
qui quelque part
that
travaille
is
sur la gouvernance de la mobilité,
working on
des
the
données de
governance of
mobilité
mobility,
et en s'inscrivant en fait dans
and
une dynamique,
we are within
en
a
tout cas de
dynamic
stratégie data-driven
for
autour de la
strategies that are
mobilité. Un
data-driven on
observatoire
mobility.
dont en
The
fait
observatory
les missions ou les fonctions
and
essentielles
our mission,
tournent
our
autour en fait
function
de la
is
structuration, je
based
l'avais
on
je l'ai dit tout à
structuring
l'heure par rapport à
data. I
l'expérience
saw it
donc qui a été
in
développée
the experience
en
that
fait
was
beaucoup de
presented,
similitudes,
and there are many
circulation de la donnée
similarities,
avec
circulation of
l'organisation des
data
systèmes
with the
d'information,
organization of information
l'animation aussi.
system, and the
L'observatoire
also
a ce rôle d'animation avec différents acteurs, qu'ils
the
soient en fait
communication with actors
donc les universitaires et d'autres acteurs
for
dans le domaine du
universities
transport et autres
and
pour
other
en tout cas
actors in transportation
orienter toute
to
la réflexion autour de ces données-là
guide
et
the
l'analyse, la
thinking
production de
on data
connaissances à
and the
travers en fait
analysis, the
ces
production
stratégies
of
data-driven,
knowledge
quelle que
for
soit
the
aussi la valeur
data-driven
qui pourrait quelque part
strategies with
permettre aussi de
value
pouvoir en tout cas
added
assurer le dialogue avec
in
les
order to
différents
have a
participants.
dialogue
Donc
with
aujourd'hui,
the
notre
protagonists.
ambition quelque
Our
part, c'est
ambition today
d'aller d'une
is
logique de collecte
to
d'informations
have
puisque nous
the
avons en fait
collection of
plusieurs
data
initiatives de
first. We
collecte
have
aujourd'hui qui
several
permettent
initiatives in
d'alimenter en
this
fait les politiques
in
de
order to
mobilité. Mais
feed
l'objectif
the
aujourd'hui, c'est
policies
d'aller
for mobility, but the
sur en
objective
tout cas toute la chaîne de
being
valeur de la
to
donnée en
have a
partant de la
chain of
production
value of
jusqu'à en
data
fait
from
la prise de
production
décision. Donc ça,
to
c'est une
the
ambition que nous
decision
avons
making.
à
This is
notre
our
niveau.
ambition.
Maintenant, sur en fait
And
la
now,
structure des
for
différentes
the
données, bon, nous,
structure of
nous avons
data,
travaillé sur en
we
fait
worked
à bâtir en fait un système de données.
on
Nous
constructing
collectons
a
aujourd'hui des données
data
de trafic
system.
à travers
So
des
we
capteurs
have
qui ont
data
été acquis dans
collected
le cadre du
through
projet BRT
the
financé par
BRT
la Banque
project
mondiale et nous
launched
avons
by
pu
the World
acquérir
Bank,
des capteurs, des
and we
radars qui permettent quelque
acquired
part de faire la collecte
radars
automatique des
that
données de
have an
trafic.
automatic
Nous avons également
data
acquis des
collection
drones
for
quelque
traffic.
part qui
We have
permettent
drones
aussi de
also
renforcer ce
that
dispositif et permettent aussi de
strengthen
faire
all the
plus de la
systems
surveillance de trafic.
and we do surveys and surveillance of traffic. We have data collection on demand and the behaviors in mobility. So we have households, mobility models. That's a survey dating back to 2010 and 2015. So we'll have another survey for households for 2026 and to update the demand data with other data for our system.
With the data that is also with regards to use of mass transit and taking into account other externalities. So that's an overview of some of the work streams that we're focusing on. I know that we could go deeper into details, but I just wanted to give you some ideas of what we're doing. Thank you very much, Simon, and thank you to the audience. So now we will hand you the floor and we're ready to take questions.
Gora and colleague from CETUD. And thanks to our two presenters from ARTM. We now have about 15 minutes for a conversation between the presenters and the audience. So if you have questions, you can raise your hand on the Zoom platform. You can also type your questions either in the chat or in the Q&A section. And I would like to invite in particular colleagues working for other African transport authorities or governments to maybe share their reflections, their reactions, their questions on the Montreal experience. I see that we have colleagues from Burkina Faso, for instance. I see several colleagues connected from Benin, from Cotonou. I know that Benin is currently reflecting on how to organize its institutional framework to improve, let's say, the governance of urban mobility at the metropolitan level in the Greater Cotonou region. So maybe some of the colleagues from Benin have reactions. I don't see any hands for now. Si les collègues du Bénin souhaitent réagir ou poser des questions sur l'expérience de Montréal, c'est une opportunité de le faire. We have a few questions from the chat. Maybe I'll start there. One question was regarding Montreal was how do you incorporate social values metrics such as accessibility for people with disabilities, rural connectivity, equitable access, etc., alongside traditional efficiency and output measures in the contracts that you sign with operators. So in terms of, let's say, environmental and social criteria, how do you manage to include these in the maybe service agreements that you sign with your operators? Maybe Ludwig, do you want to take this one?
En français ou en...
As you want, comme vous voulez.
Or
on a toujours la traduction.
En fait,
whichever you'd like.
angles, je vais aussi céder la parole à
So let's talk
mon
about
collègue,
some different
du point de vue
perspectives.
données. Il y a des choses qu'on fait intéressantes de
When
ce
we're
point de
looking
vue-là
at
également.
data, I
C'est
will let
essentiellement
my
des
colleague
sujets
respond to
qui
that
sont
because we have some
ouverts
interesting
dans nos
approaches
compétences. Par
there.
exemple, en termes de
We focus
tarification,
on what falls
travaille
within our purview. So we look at
sur
fares,
la
for example.
tarification, par exemple, sociale.
We do work on
On a différents modèles
social
dans le monde. On peut
fares.
voir les étudiants
We look
très
at different
loin, les
models
personnes
in the
âgées,
world where they
paiement,
might
etc.
have
On est en train
discounts
de travailler
for
sur
students,
une
for
tarification qui est
seniors,
dite
or
sociale.
for
La
people with
tarification
handicap.
peut être basée, par exemple, sur le revenu
And we
des
can also
personnes.
look
Donc, ça,
at
c'est un
fares that
financement
are
qui
based
est
on
regardé.
a person's
Également, quand on
income.
travaille sur la planification des
When
services
we
avec les
work
opérateurs,
on planning
on s'assure
service
que
with regards to our
le
operators,
territoire est couvert de manière
we
équitable.
know that we
Et
want to
ça,
make
c'est
sure that
principalement
we
des
are
outils qui sont développés
covering
par l'équipe
the
d'ANSI,
region in an
où,
equitable
par exemple,
way.
on peut mesurer l'accessibilité
For
aux
example, we
différents modes
can
de
measure
transport et
accessibility
même
to
également
different
avec les données
modes
dont on
of
dispose sur les
transportation.
revenus.
And we can also look at the
Amener différents
different
indicateurs
income levels.
d'équité
We
en
can
termes
use
d'accès.
different
Par
indicators
exemple, dans un quartier qui
that
est plus
focus on
défavorisé,
equity of access.
on va
So we can prioritize certain populations or prioritize certain indicators. And then we can use this to analyze different operators' proposals for service. We also work a great deal on equity questions from a metropolitan point of view. Yes, I think that has answered the question quite well.
Okay. Et on a une autre question, je vais la lire en français
Very
parce qu'elle est
good.
rédigée
I
en français.
have
Comment
another question. I'm
optimise-t-on
going to read it
l'utilisation des
in
fonds publics dans
French.
le Grand
How do
Montréal,
you use
en particulier
public
pour l'allocation des fonds
funds
disponibles
in
entre
the
les
Greater Montreal
investissements dans le
area
réseau de voirie
when we're looking
et
at
le transport public?
investments
Donc,
in
comment se fait
rails and in
l'arbitrage
public transportation? So
entre
how do
infrastructure,
you
on va dire, et
balance
services?
between infrastructure
Oui, c'est une
and
très bonne question parce
service?
que c'est toujours un débat
Yes,
intéressant
that is an excellent question
au
because
Québec
it's
et à
a debate
Montréal.
that we have to
En
this day
fait, on a
in
certaines
Quebec
sources
and
de
in
financement qui
Montreal.
sont dédiées. Donc,
We
tu parlais tout
have
à l'heure de la taxe sur
certain
l'essence, la
sources
taxe
of
climatique. Ça, c'est
funding
des
that
choses
are
qui sont dédiées au
dedicated.
transport collectif. Ils nous
So
appartiennent.
we have funding that we receive that is
C'est
an
un
envelope
financement de
for
base.
public transportation.
Le
That is
financement qui est plus
our
discrétionnaire,
foundational
c'est celui que
funding.
le
So then
gouvernement
we
va
have
nous
some more
verser
discretionary spending that
et
we can
celui que
make.
les municipalités peuvent nous verser. Et là,
And that
on est
is what
sujet
the
à des
municipalities can
priorisations
provide. So
différentes. Le
we
gouvernement
discuss with them
provincial
what we're going to
décide de mettre plus
prioritize.
d'argent dans les routes
We can also look at commercial activities.
pour
Are
des
we going to
projets
put more of those funds
réfection routière et autres.
into
Il est possible qu'il y ait moins de sommes mis dans le budget pour le
into
transport
which
collectif. Et là,
project?
nos
We
projets
can
et
look
nos
at
services
what we're
vont
going to do
en
for
ressentir
public transportation, and with public
les
transportation,
conséquences.
are we going
C'est
to
toujours un
look at
débat parce que
specific projects? We
Monsieur
can
tout
do
à
an
l'heure
analysis of the consequences of
Dakar
various programs and
mentionnait
projects.
l'équilibre entre
I know that our colleague from
les
Dakar talked
dépenses qu'on a en
about
exploitation et les
the
dépenses qu'on a
difference between the
en maintien
spending
d'actifs.
for
C'est un enjeu
maintenance
très
and
important
for
pour nous
operation.
actuellement parce
And
qu'à
this
la
is a
fois le
very
réseau
important question
routier
for us
et le réseau
because
de
we have
transport
the
public a
road
été
network and
principalement
we have
construit dans
the
les années 60
transportation
et
network.
70.
The roads were
Il y a
mainly
beaucoup
built in the
d'infrastructures qui
60s and
arrivent à
70s, and we
leur
have
fin
a
de
system
vie utile ou qui doivent
that
faire
is
l'objet
coming to the end of
d'investissements
its
très
shelf
importants en
life.
maintien, à la fois dans
And
le
so it
routier et le transport
requires
collectif.
significant
Et donc, ça, il
investment
y a
in
vraiment un
order to
arbitrage
maintain
toujours
this network.
en fonction des capacités
So we are
financières du
currently
gouvernement
finding the
à en
balance
mettre plus dans les
with
routes
regards
ou
to the
plus dans le
government's
transport
financial
collectif. Et si je pourrais recommander
Are we
quelque chose
going
à
to
une région
allocate
qui
more to
construit un
maintenance
système et
and
qui,
upkeep
on
of
parle de
roads or
professionnaliser
of
le
the
domaine
public transportation?
ou
So we
mieux
need
le
to
réguler ou amener
look at
des
what we're
modes plus
going to
structurants comme
prioritize.
les bus à haut
What
niveau de
are
service et autres,
some
c'est qu'il faut
more
vraiment penser à cette
structural
dimension
modes
qui va
that
venir
we
plus
can
tard parce
focus
que c'est
on?
très facile
We
de
know
construire
that
des nouvelles
some
infrastructures, d'aller
other
chercher du financement. Politiquement,
modes
c'est
will
très
require less
intéressant
investment
à
or
inaugurer, c'est très
are
intéressant
an
à vendre à la
easier
population, mais
investment
très
and an easier
rapidement,
upkeep.
après 15,
So
20
we
ans,
can put that off. But we
on
know that
atteint
if we
parfois
continue
des difficultés
to
à financer juste le
push
maintien
to
de
the
ces
side
infrastructures-là.
the maintenance
Ça
of
vaut pour
certain
les routes, mais ça
infrastructure
vaut également
in
pour le
15 years,
transport
it's going to cost
public.
us a lot more. So this is a very important
Merci,
public debate.
ouais, effectivement, c'est un petit calcul qu'on
Thank
avait fait
you. Yes,
dans
this
certaines
is
villes. Étant moi-même
a
basé au Cap, en
calculation that
Afrique
we
du
had to
Sud, on
do
voyait que
in
les
various cities.
subventions à
For example,
l'exploitation
in
du
South
système de
Africa, we
BRT en
had a question
cumulé
with regards
après
to
7 ou 8 ans
the
avait déjà dépassé le
uh,
montant de l'investissement dans
BRT
l'infrastructure de base,
program, and
casse à
we
plus
looked at
la mobilité,
spending that
mais
needed to be
tout ça ensuite
done
finissait
in
par
investment
peser lourdement dans la
into
balance.
basic
Une
infrastructure, and
autre
we
question
know
en
that it
français,
is always very
concernant
difficult to
les
find
équilibres
the balance
financiers, quelle est
between the
la
two.
part des contributions financières
Another question,
des
what
collectivités
are the
territoriales dans le budget du
financial
CESU? Donc, c'est une
contributions
question
of the
pour les collectivités,
territories
Gora en
in this
particulier,
study
en comparaison, disons, à ce qui a été présenté
when
pour
we're
Montréal.
comparing it
Pour le CETUD,
to
la
was
compétence volet
done
transport
in
transférée
Montreal?
à l'État n'est-elle
We
pas une
have
contrainte dans la mise en œuvre des projets de transport
information
pour les
that was
collectivités,
sent to
en
the government
suscitant un
was
conflit
were we looking
ou
at
un conflit
the
d'intérêts entre l'État et les
limitations
collectivités
of the
territoriales? Je ne suis pas complètement
territories
familier de cette
and
réforme, mais
municipalities?
Gora, est-ce que vous
I'm
voyez
not exactly
la question
sure
fait
of
référence?
what
Est-ce que
this
vous
is
seriez
referring to. Gora, if you have any idea, please go ahead.
Merci, Simon. Juste, en fait, est-ce que vous pouvez
Thank you,
préciser la
Simon.
première question,
Could
s'il vous
you
plaît?
maybe clarify the
Quelle est la
first
part des
question for me?
contributions financières
It
des
is, what
collectivités
is the share
territoriales dans le
of
budget du
the
CETUD?
territorial collectivity
Et donc,
contribution
avec
to this
en faisant le lien
envelope,
avec ce que vous
and
mentionniez
then tying it to what
du
you
fait que
mentioned
la compétence transport est du
with
côté de
regards
l'État.
to the fact that
Parfait. Oui,
that
effectivement,
transportation falls
le
under the
CETUD, avant
government
sa
purview.
création, il avait été accompagné
Since its creation, we have been
d'une loi
supported by a law on funds for the development of urban transportation. And we have received several contributions in order to grow this fund. And we received contributions from regional authorities. We know that in large cities, so we have 4 large cities that we focused on, and there is an annual contribution, but even though this is a law, the cities don't necessarily, and the regional authorities are not necessarily always able to make this contribution because everything depends on their current situation. We know that these authorities may have difficulty in providing this subsidy and this contribution. So we try to take into account the reality of their situation. But we know that each city has its own mobility policy, and we look at this setup and we try to consider how we can integrate their policy into our framework. We're also trying to reverse the trend so that instead of recognizing that there are more and more problems with regards to urban mobility, that we can encourage these regional authorities to contribute. We have many other funds that the regional authorities can contribute to, but in terms of transportation, we see that it's not always the priority. So when we're looking at the institutional setup with regards to these local authorities, we know that this setup does not necessarily prioritize the mobility policy of the various local governments. We are looking at the trends and we want to encourage these local authorities to be more involved and to contribute to the outlook. So we have spoken with the minister who is in charge of local governments so that he can make mobility governance priorities so that it can be integrated. We work with many different ministries. We have the Ministry of Transportation, we have the Ministry of the various local governments. So we need to work between all of these ministries so that we can look at the policies that have already been implemented, and we can also make sure that the local governments are able to take over control of urban mobility. But we also need to rethink mobility governance to make sure that these local governments are more involved. Thank you, Laura. We are coming to the end of our time, so I'd like to give our participants who are connected here one last opportunity to raise their hand and ask a question. And if there are no hands raised, perhaps I can ask one last question in the chat. It is a question for Gora. Someone is asking if SSATP has a project in order to have contracts with F2. So these are informal transportation that could become formal. So does that represent an industrial or commercial risk with regards to public transportation? Yes, indeed, we have some projections of that. In 2005, we looked at individuals who owned vehicles, and we knew that they were not able to move immediately into a very sophisticated offer or proposal. So we needed to have a transitional phase where people were able to take a period of time in order to professionalize their offer. So this happened in 2005, but all of this was done in a very well-defined context. We know that there are many countries that have this system of informal transportation, and we know that if you want to move immediately into a more sophisticated system, that doesn't work overnight. So you need to work with those who are in charge of public transportation. They need to have a delegation. They should develop terms of reference for these informal transportation companies. They need to have meetings. They need to also make sure that even though the state will be there to support them, they are able to undertake the obligations of this job on their own. So that is what we have done with AF2. But it is with the reforms to AF2, we have created an association that can manage this and help them to professionalize.
Thank you very much, Gora. We are reaching the end of our time, but I would like, before we close, to invite all the panelists to turn on their camera so that we can take a nice group picture as a screenshot. Kaori, if you could take care of that, that would be great. So Abimbola, if you can turn on your camera if you're with us, that would be great. And I'll also now take the time to thank very warmly Ludwig, Hamze, Abimbola, and Gora for their time and for sharing their insights with us today. Thanks to all the participants for joining us, and we look forward to continuing these conversations and these exchanges in the future as part of our AUMA and SSATP webinar series. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.